Now, when you make this movie, you get to show it to your family, which is incredible because I mean it's an amazing story. I mean, like, I can't imagine like being a family member and watching this movie. Like, what does that feel like to you to sit down with your family and watch this?
I saw it with my mom.
She took you to LA, which is amazing.
I know, it's a trip.
That's why it's so. That's why there's such interesting parallels.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. The first time I saw it with my mom, and it was just. I mean, it's like her favorite. It's her favorite. She's seen it so many times now. It was really special. It's really. I mean, taking my grandparents was incredible. My grandma was crying for like a bunch of time afterwards, and my grandpa started crying because my grandma was crying. It's just like this incredibly sweet and lovely experience. It's wonderful because you can bring a 6-year-old to this movie. I mean, if you're okay with, a couple scenes of a little bit of strong language. For the most part, it's not too bad. And the fact that you can kind of bring all these people to it is a little different than Birdman in that sense.
Slightly.
Or other things that I've done. But
Zombieland. That's a kid's movie
exactly.
Too. Yeah.
I know. When my grandparents saw Zombieland, they were like, that is not necessarily our type of movie, but you did a really great job. I was like, thanks, guys.
Yeah, that was an awesome movie.
But yeah, so it's pretty special.
There's a great moment in the trailer, obviously, it's also in the movie where you're singing that song where you say, here's to the ones who dream, which is, I mean, it just breaks my heart every time I listen to it. It's a beautiful song, but it's, and I'm wondering, you as Emma Stone, who moved to LA when you were 15 years old, who went through this and had this dream, as you were singing that song in that moment, obviously you're in character, but is there anything going through your mind about like, wow, like, this is, personally happened to me, I'm here, I'm auditioning. How does it feel when you're doing that scene?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that I thought that song was really effective and really beautiful just as being a creative person in general, not even in that audition setting, but that song just feels like a monologue, saying like, look at us, like we're total fools, we're total idiots for doing this, and it breaks our heart, and yet that's all we can do is make a mess. And so yeah, I mean, I just thought about, if you are a creative person, it's incredible and devastating, pretty much intermittently all day long, every day. So yeah, I guess that's what fueled that for me.
Now, obviously, I loved you in Birdman, and I'm wondering, like, with someone like Chivo who does these long tracking shots, and there's a lot of them in this movie as well. Damien, and he shot 35mm, which is really, really cool.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, like, did that prep you for this? Were you used to the long tracking shots because of working with someone like Chivo, and was there any similarities and difference? Because obviously you're dancing and singing, so it's a little bit different. But.
Right. I had a weird lucky double experience in that sense where I had done Birdman, and then I had also done Cabaret on Broadway right before, like when I met Damien, I was in the middle of the play, he came to see the play. And so it was like, I was singing and dancing every night, not this kind of dancing at all. I mean, we needed to learn to tap dance and ballroom dance and everything, but I was kind of doing that, and then had done this film that was, so rehearsed and choreographed and all these long takes. So it was sort of like a strange amalgamation of those two experiences in a way. Obviously me as a totally different character than like Sally Bowles and Sam, who are both, struggling with some stuff that's different than her. But yeah, it was a nice preparation for something like this.
Obviously, this is a film that like deals with the idea of dreams and like following your dreams, and it's so interesting because it is so rare to actually break out and get into this business. And like that idea of that struggle is that you bring the personal quality of what you went through to the character. Does having that storyline of doing what you did help you get into the character more if you hadn't had that process?
I mean, I'm sure in the sense that she is an auditioning actress, and I relate very strongly. I auditioned pretty consistently for 3 years before getting like little parts before I got super bad, and that, when you're in a position, a kind of job where you get rejected, it's like a million job interviews where you get rejected each time. It's just a lot of rejection, which everybody knows. So that, I understood
Obviously,
that feeling. Like it was very relatable in that way.
Did you ever have that giving up moment? Like
Oh yeah. I probably had that every 6 months.
Really?
But I didn't go home. I would just cry on the floor and say, I want to give up, I'm done, I want to give up, it's over. And then, I would either be in the room with my mom or call someone, and they would say, okay, do you want to go home? And I'd be like, well, no, but I give up, but I'm not going home. And then it would just kind of start all over again. And I've had that experience in the middle of shoots on movies. Like,
Really?
I've been in the middle of shooting something, I'm like, well, after this one, it's over. I can't do it anymore because I obviously don't know how to act. What the hell am I doing with my life? You know, it's just, it is a consistent, that's part of the process, I think, of, or at least for me, and that's probably not what everybody goes through, but that's occasionally part of the process for the way that my, you know, kind of inner workings go, I guess. It's a very vulnerable, strange job. It's also incredible and so fulfilling. It's just a really emotional job.
What I love about this movie is, well, the chemistry is incredible, obviously, and Ryan Gosling, you've worked with him 3 times now, Gangster Squad and Crazy Stupid Love, and I'm genuinely curious, if you had never worked with him, how different do you think this would feel? Like, would you have to do more rehearsal? Because I mean, obviously, you talk to actors who've worked together before, they have that connection because of working on previous movies.
Yeah.
Would it have been a different process if you'd never worked together?
I'm sure, probably. I think that was one of the great things about it, is that we didn't really need to come up with what was gonna, how it was just sort of, I think, and Ryan has said this before, we've improvised a lot. Like, we improvised a lot in Crazy Stupid Love and in Gangster Squad, and Damien gave us a lot of free rein in our scenes together to kind of play around. And when you've done that with another actor, you really get to know them very quickly, like where they're gonna go and what they're like. And so we kind of had that benefit of just being like, you know, it's like a repertory theater where everybody gets to switch roles because they're really comfortable with each other. It felt, you know, it feels like that. So I don't know that it would be the same if we had just met.
The opening shot of this film is arguably one of the greatest shots I've ever seen. I compare it to like Orson Welles' Touch of Evil, like just like the idea of having this continuous tracking shot.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, because we don't pick up with you and Ryan until about 6 minutes into the shot, what are you doing before that? Are you already in the car just waiting for the camera to get to you? How does that work?
No. So that, I mean, without taking away some of the feeling of that shot and like telling the secrets of it, there is a stitch or two.
Like what Chiba did with Birdman.
Yeah. So no, we weren't like sitting through the musical number on the freeway. That shot of it moving down to us is its own kind of thing.
It's amazing.
But then it does move along our cars till he peels past me.
And they really did shut down that
on-ramp, for 2 days.
How did they time? Like, they timed it with the exact sun. Like, how did they get all that? Like, they timed it perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, it was probably luck with the weather, but also it was the hottest day of the year on record. It was like 100 and something degrees. So it was this crazy heat wave, and there were all these warnings that they gave to all the dancers and to us. Like, we had to stay super hydrated. There was like a doctor there. So not only was it this kind of incredible feat, but I know from being there, it was also like intense, crazy sunny temperatures. So yeah, it was a real feat of human accomplishment.
Now, I love watching
a feat of accomplishment,
like
is that a thing?
A feat of
Is that double the same word?
Yeah, I guess you're right.
Yeah.
To me, the Zombieland cameo is the greatest cameo in the history of movies.
It's the best.
It's the greatest thing ever.
It's the best.
I was watching like Rhett Reese talk about like the idea of like how it went down, because I think it was originally gonna be Patrick Swayze, and then had a bunch of people. Can you talk about the memory of shooting that scene, and like, were those the real costumes? Like, were they the real costumes?
Yeah.
Like, what was your story like during that moment?
That was so I thought, I mean, now, because I've known him now since then, Bill is really good friends with Woody Harrelson.
Yeah.
And so I mean, Woody's like one of my favorite pals. Yeah. And so I now know Bill, you know, for much longer and much better than I did before. But I thought that I was really playing it very cool. Like, when I met him, when Woody introduced me, I was like, this is going really well. I'm like really holding it together. And the director, Ruben, sent me some B-roll from that day, because we shot with him for 2 days. And I was like having a psychological breakdown. And I thought I was totally fine. But really, in all the B-roll, I'm like this. Like staring at him, being a total creepo.
It's Peter Venkman.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts. But I was, so I had a really incredible 2 days. And my dad, who is like an enormous Bill Murray fan, came to the set those days and got to meet him, and we all played pool together, and it was a blast.
I do want to talk to you about the audition sequences, because they're absolutely amazing to watch. And I know a lot of the stories, specifically the one where the knock on the door actually happened to Ryan Gosling. Mm-hmm. But do you have a specific story of an audition that just went crazy for you, that you just that stayed with you for many years?
I think, yeah, there are a few that have sat with me, but in talking about this movie, because people have, have wondered about like my crazy audition stories, I realized that as bad as some auditions could be, the worst periods of time were like the large swaths of time where I was getting no auditions. It's just like obsessing over, I mean, maybe now I'm looking at auditions with rose-colored glasses because I've been lucky and am able to do what I love, but I was just like happy to be auditioning in certain periods of time because there were all these times where like no one wants you to come in for anything and even try. So that kind of like feeling ignored, feeling I think is what I understand about me the most, because at least when you're auditioning you're getting the opportunity.
The dancing numbers in the movie are absolutely incredible, but specifically the scene that blew my mind was when you guys were floating and that like I don't know what we even call that. Like there was like the
planetarium.
It was a phenomenal moment. And I'm wondering, when you shoot something like that and you have to be on wires or whatever you're on doing that moment, how do you like, you're in character, but you have to think about where you're going, where you're moving. How do you balance out like the acting, but also the choreography?
Yeah, it's, well, I mean, everything in this movie really came down to, especially the dance numbers, really came down to rehearsal. So it's one of the things that Mandy Moore, our choreographer, was saying to us was like, okay, you can really work on the technique and get every step right, but if I don't see in your face that you're, that you are these people and that this is joyous for you to express yourself in this way, none of it's going to matter. It doesn't matter how great of a dancer you are. Which I guess is sort of the story of Black Swan.
That's right, Darren Aronofsky.
Hey, great job.
You know what you're doing.
It's the truth.
Yeah.
So we really had to kind of focus on that, and because ultimately that is our job. It's it all really comes from here, and so that additional sort of technical side was just another interesting challenge. But yeah, that was something I think we were focusing on throughout, in the duet number, where you really, it's one long take, you really don't want to mess up, and it's easy to grit your teeth and like get the steps, but then you have to totally let it go and just be present. And I don't, it's a good question because I don't really.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing.
We're working on it.
Damien's
Thank you.
amazing. I'm so happy for you, and this is like,
Thank you.
Like this is just so awesome. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much.
Opening shot, absolutely incredible, and I want to ask you about how that was done, because it's a 6-minute tracking shot, and how did you actually get it done? Like, can you just talk about that shot in general?
Yeah. Well, so we shut down this easy pass ramp. So it wasn't the full freeway. It was an easy pass ramp connecting to the 105 and the 110 going downtown. So we were able to basically use that as our set for 2 days, for a Saturday and a Sunday. And then we just packed it with cars and brought, obviously the camera and the crane. And by that point, before we even got on set, it had to be like really intricately rehearsed, obviously.
Yeah.
And so what it wound up being was, it seems to be a 6-minute shot. It's actually 3 shots with two stitches in it. It's 2 of the whip pans. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So it was designed that way. So we knew where the stitches would be, and we knew kind of where we wouldn't be able to stitch and where we had to be kind of getting it in camera. But other than the stitches, it's all pretty much practical. I mean, we wanted it to feel like a real location and make it evident that this wasn't some kind of fake, illusory, sort of backdrop or use of a studio soundstage environment. So when you're up high, you see the dancers, but underneath them you see actual, like you were saying before, you see actual freeway traffic just going. People who had no idea probably that we were shooting the number above them.
Do you have to blur out their license plate? You probably can't even see it because it's just so high up.
Just small enough that we get away with it, so it's all good.
No, but it's interesting because that shot is so incredible, and then obviously we get to Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone's character. But like, speaking of practical in-camera stuff, I mean, obviously with Ryan Gosling playing the piano, I know that he actually did play the piano, and you have these phenomenal shots where you come out of his hands and come up. Do you do those kind of just to show us, hey, it's really him, or were those planned shots the way those were?
Some were planned from the get-go, and then some were honestly kind of reshaped a little bit when I realized how good he was.
Yeah.
Because it's like, he didn't really play much piano before that. He knew a little bit of piano, but not much by any stretch before we started prep. And he took it upon himself to just learn these pieces inside and out for 4 months straight, just rehearsing every day, in addition to the dancing and the singing and whatnot. And so by the time we were close to shooting, suddenly I was seeing him being able to play really convincingly these really complicated jazz piano pieces. And so when you've got that kind of gold mine, I wanted to showcase it more.
And there's no hand double. There's just
not a single hand double in the movie. Not even close-ups of his hands where we could have and would have. But when we saw how good it was, we were like, why spend the money on a piano double? We'll just use Ryan.
Yeah, that was amazing. Now, obviously, what I love about this movie, well, besides the story and everything like that, is these incredible long tracking shots that you do with the dance numbers. But one thing I love about the movie is that I found myself loving the way the camera moved. And it was like the camera was almost like a character as well. And I mean that in the best way possible, because like I suspend my disbelief to a point where I'm watching the story, but I'm also appreciating how you're moving the camera. Is there a balance that audiences can have when they can appreciate a camera and still think they're watching a movie?
Yeah, you know, I think it depends on the story. This was the kind of movie where I wanted to sort of celebrate the act of making a movie. You know, some movies I think you're allowed and should revel in the joy of movie making itself, and so I wanted the camera to be a character in a way, and I wanted the city to be a character, and I wanted the colors to be a character. Like I wanted things beyond just the main storyline to feel active and present, and I wanted also, you know, I feel like there's a way of doing certain kind of long takes, especially with dance numbers and stuff, where it's less about, it wasn't about sort of showing off technically, it was more about trying to create an environment where this stuff was just unfolding.
Sure.
So you didn't really get the sense of like, okay, here's real life and here's the musical number and here's real life again. That it just would all be hopefully one continuous, you know, circular motion without the manipulation of editing.
So cool. Now, obviously, the audition scenes are incredible. I know a lot of them were inspired by Ryan Gosling, especially the knock on the door. But I'm wondering, I would love to hear like a story where you pitched, like, because you wrote this in 2010, right?
Initially,
This
yeah,
script,
yeah.
Do you have any crazy pitching stories where something happened like that, like someone like ruined the moment or something like that, where you're pitching a film to like a studio or producer?
Well, I do remember once like sitting across from like a somewhat prominent like studio head pitching something, and I noticed kind of mid-pitch that his eyes had sort of started to kind of do this, and he was starting to sort of like do the kind of sway and then would wake up, you know? And I just like, it's stuff like that where you just have to kind of, I don't know, you tried to not let it get to you and you just keep doing it, but I think that I never had it as hard as actors have it, because, you know, it's like if I'm pitching something that I'm going to do, or I'm describing something. But with an actor, it's you, like you're your own instrument. I wanted to really try to highlight just what they go through, you know, trying to get a part. It's not easy.
It's interesting. After I saw Whiplash, I took away from that movie the good job element of it, because like it made me think about my real life when people say that. This movie, the part I took away from specifically for me personally was the idea of like not being a traditionalist, but also like kind of revolutionizing something, like revolutionizing jazz and enhancing it in a way where it opens up to a larger audience. I think John Legend talks about that in the movie. But you kind of do something similar here. You take a classic musical setting, you revolutionize it in your own way into modern terms, and you shoot 35 millimeters, still keeping that nostalgic classic there. Is that how you see, like, does that line pertain to like this film in general, like what you did with the idea of the musical and putting it in contemporary times?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because the scene you reference with where John Legend, who plays this musician Keith, is talking to Ryan's character, and they're kind of debating, you know, what in that case they're talking about jazz, but to me, as you say, like they could be talking about musicals, movies, anything really. It's like any art form, at least, where there's a debate about kind of how much do you hold on to tradition and how much do you move it along, you know, towards the future. And so I remember when we were shooting that, it felt kind of like two sides of my brain arguing to each other, and it's arguments I've had in my own mind for a while. I think it's because I'm such a movie lover, and I grew up being a movie lover, and when it comes to musicals, my favorite musicals are like the ones from the 30s, 40s, 50s, you know, and so, you know, that would make me think, I was born in the wrong era. But I'm also like really, I don't know, I live in LA now, I'm fascinated by what the city is today, you know, and I'm fascinated by the way it looks and feels and sounds today, and what it means to be kind of a young wannabe artist or creator in America today, you know, so these sort of contemporary situations. So I wanted to, the whole idea with this movie was to try to combine those two things, to try to see if the older movies had something to tell us about the way we live now.
One question about Whiplash, and I've interviewed Miles Teller and J.K. Simmons over the years, and one of the things that Miles Teller told me, which I thought was interesting, was that as the movie ends and goes to black, he thinks that Andrew becomes this amazing drummer, but then dies alone. He gave like a really interesting answer, and then J.K. Simmons kind of said something similar, like the ending was basically showing that all that twisted mentorship actually led to him becoming the greatest, and he said something about him dying at 34. I don't know how he got that exactly, but I'm just curious, like, I know it ends in black, I'm not going to ask you definitively what you think happens, but do you have an idea of where the characters go right after it goes to black?
In this one?
No, at the end of Whiplash.
Yeah. I mean, I think the 34 thing comes from Charlie Parker.
Right, that's what he said.
Yeah, no, I have a very pessimistic view when it comes to that movie. Like, with that movie, it was funny because it was sort of like structurally, it's sort of like a sports movie, and so you're leading to this big victory. So in my mind, it was, let's lead to what it would nominally be a happy ending. The drummer, succeeds in some capacity, but the success comes at such a cost that basically it's the saddest happy ending you can imagine. And I'm really because I love that sort of when you can somehow combine a happy ending with a sad ending or combine those sort of emotions. I don't know, I like leaving audiences with something to chew on in that regard. So I'm actually really happy, with Whiplash when I hear people have different interpretations from mine of the ending, because it means that there's a conversation to be had.
Now, we were talking about film before the interview started in 35, and you got to shoot this thing on 35, which is incredible, considering the idea of the classicness of the nostalgia element. And what did that mean to you, and what do you think 35 brought to this that digital wouldn't? Digital couldn't.
Digital is capable of great things. I shot Whiplash digitally, but right now, for my money, there's nothing that can capture color the way that film still can, at least without spending a lot of time in post and tweaking stuff after the fact. There's something about just celluloid, light hitting celluloid that I still think is so magical. And so in a weird way, it wasn't even so much a kind of philosophical, nostalgic kind of reasoning behind shooting film. It was just literally, I wanted the movie to be one where the colors bled off the screen, where it felt like it was like looking at a wet print, And we were shooting outside a lot in, kind of harsh LA daylight. And those are things that digital just, again, in my mind, doesn't hold up well in. And my DP, Lena Sandgren, certainly agreed, and he's a film nut, like a celluloid nut. And so he and I together, we were adamant, from the get-go that this had to be shot, not just 35, but 35 anamorphic, and just shot in a way that would
lens flares.
Yeah, just all the wonderful things that Anamorphic gives you. The obviously the wide. We went even wider than your normal 240. We shot in 255, and
Are you serious?
And just to kind of give LA that sort of epic scope. For what ultimately is a very intimate sort of, private kind of story between two people, really at its core. That was, sort of part of the hope, was to make everything, even just little moments between them, or, dilapidated alleyways in the back, in the background of Los Angeles, just any sort of detail like that to make it all feel epic and movie in the kind of grandest sense of the term.
I think the beauty of cinema and music is they're so similar in regards to their arcs. I mean, a song has an arc just like a character does. And I'm wondering, obviously you're a jazz person as well, so I'm wondering, do you look at music and cinema similarly in the sense of when you direct a scene with music, as you're directing a character with the arc as well? Is that something that you think about when you're doing it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I don't know, I think in many ways movies, at their purest aspire to music. That there's something about being able to communicate without any words, being able to communicate on a more abstract level, and being able to cut right through to the heart of an emotion that obviously music is so capable of. Music is such a universal language, and I think cinema is capable of that as well. And so I guess what I'm always looking for is, using the stuff you would associate with literature, using plot and dialogue and character, et cetera, as a means to create, something that is more, I don't know, that cannot be communicated with words, no matter how hard you tried.
Dude, it was awesome talking to
Cool,
you.
Thanks, man.
Dude,
Thank you. You too.
Thank you so much, man.